So, time to get started. We are finishing up PHP today and actually talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is regular expressions. I think they're really cool. And we're also going to be talking about PHP's interface to MySQL database. And after today, you should be able to do the second homework assignment for your web project, which is the PHP backend. The book's approach and my approach to PHP SQL is a little different. The book showed you the object-oriented way of interfacing with MySQL. My notes emphasize the procedural way. I don't care which way you do it in the homework assignment. I'm going to go over the procedural way today, but if you feel more comfortable using the object-oriented way that the textbook employed, by all means use the object-oriented technique that the book employed. PHP has effectively three packages for accessing databases. One is their general purpose PHP data objects, which aside from being covered in the book today, I'm not really going to cover. It's a more complicated package for accessing databases. The advantage to it is that it works with more than just a MySQL backend. But PHP was really, I think, optimized to work with MySQL. So there are two MySQL packages. One is called MySQL and one is called MySQL-I for improved. The MySQL package was deprecated as of 2012, but you still might see it in some PHP code. Generally, you would now use MySQL-I, and they're very similar. Like in the MySQL library, the way you send a query to the MySQL databases with MySQL query, and with the improved one, what's the difference? There's an I. Okay, so it turned out when I had to redo my code for Code Assessor, it involved adding a lot of I's to the end of my procedures. Okay, so you will use either, I would prefer for the homework that you use the MySQL-I package. If you really want, you can use the PHP data objects package. If that's something you're more comfortable with, then you really should use the MySQL-I package so that you get comfortable with both. But if you decide to use PHP data objects for the homework assignment, I'm fine with that. So when you are doing the connection, this seems odd, but it's not a typo. You have to put the password in plain text in the program. It always makes everyone uncomfortable, including me, doing that. So you have to write it out. When you submit the homework assignment, we always tell you don't include your password. That we'll fill that in with our own database. So that way you don't have to worry about it. Why? I don't know. I guess somehow the password has to be transmitted, right? So if you've written a program, how else are you going to transmit the password? I mean, you can use config files, which is what we do with Code Assessor, but it's still in the config file. So I suppose you could encrypt it. Is that what you? Yep. So that's, I suppose encrypted though would work if you could send an encrypted version. Now that I'm thinking about it, it seems like that's the obvious way to do it, is have an encrypted version with public key decryption. So this just seems really insecure to me. It's always bothered me. At any rate, when you connect, you get back this so-called SQL link resource. So the book didn't really say that. You're getting that back. If it fails, you get false back. So this is actually one of those examples of dynamic typing in PHP, because you get two different types back depending on whether the operation succeeded or whether it failed. At any rate, you use that link thereafter whenever you're doing anything. So if you want to close the connection, you use that link. So where I say $connect here, you'd normally say $CONN equals MySQL connect. You get that resource, and then you use that resource. It's much like a file pointer every time you want to do any operation on the database. Then what I find really nice about the interface with MySQL is that you just give it the query string that you would give to an SQL database. So everything you learned in the first half of this course is apropos right now. If you want to do select or insert or update, you just use the normal SQL query strings that you would type in at the interpreter. So it's a very simple interface that PHP provides. And then again, if the query succeeds, it returns a resource object that contains the results of the query, and it provides an API for manipulating that resource to actually get the data out of it. And before I go into the prepared statements, I'm actually just going to show you how you extract the information from the query. So the easiest way to get something back is with fetch array. There's some other methods that also return an array of information, but generally if you want to get a row back, you should use fetch array, and it will give you something back that allows you to access the rows either as an associative array or as a numeric array. If it's an associative array, then the keys will correspond to the column names you used in your select statement. Again, very easy. Please don't use numeric indices, even though you may know that you said select like name, age, should be age from, blah, blah, blah. Please don't then, when you have gotten the row back, so this is again one row at a time. It doesn't return every row, it returns one row at a time from the thing, and it contains, what it is it would be like name, age, so it's basically an associative array, but it also has 0 and 1 in it. Please don't then start saying print, say result, $result 0. Does anyone know why it's bad to use numeric indices like this? Yep. If you change the query, like let's say that I change it so I add like gender. Now everything broke because the numeric order is different. So don't get in the habit of using numeric indices. That's why I also say use fetch row because you, or the fetch array, because you get it back as an associative index. Yeah. So there's another one called fetch row rather than fetch array, and that returns an array. It contains just numeric indices. Don't use it. Okay, use fetch array. Don't use fetch row. Okay, then sometimes all you care about is the number of rows retrieved by the select query. So in that case, you can call mySQL numRows, and this is stupid. In my opinion. If you call insert, update, or delete and you want to know the number of affected rows, you call mySQL affected rows. And of course, I never remember this. And I call mySQL numRows and wonder why it doesn't work. Okay, I just wish they would be, I mean, numRows says it's the number of rows that are affected by this query. But no, 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 no. We have to have two separate commands. One for the number of rows retrieved by a select query, and one for the number of rows affected by insert, update, or delete. And I understand the rationale that select doesn't change the database and insert, update, and delete do. But at any rate, just be aware of that. Okay, so it's really simple. Effectively, this is what I love about them. They have The connect command, the close command, that's 2. The query command is 3. Then fetch array 4. And effectively, MySQL affected rows 5 if you care. There's really only 5 functions in that API, and it allows you to do anything you need to do with a MySQL backend. I think it's really nicely done, other than what I just ranted about. Okay. Now, they do also have something called prepared SQL statements. And last time you may remember that I talked about something called an SQL injection attack, although I didn't explicitly refer to it as such. And an SQL injection attack occurs when a hacker tries to prematurely end a query by putting double quotes into it and then putting some other stuff after the double quotes or doing some other things that are going to effectively change the outcome of the query. I forget whether it was the book that was showing an example of that, where you might have something where you say, well, here's a good example. Let's say you have a query string that looks like select district from city where name equals, but instead it's just like $ from user. And what you're expecting is something where it's just a name like Columbus, okay? But instead, you get something like a string from the user that says Brad or true. So what happens when you put that substitution in? What happens? It returns everything. So a hacker all of a sudden gets access to every single item in your database. So that's called an SQL injection attack, because in effect they're injecting stuff into the query that you didn't expect to get injected. And actually, there's no real way to scrub it or do other things easily that are going to fight back. I mean, you can think, okay, I'll check for or and then a clever hacker will think of some other way to get the injection attack. So they came up with a more secure way, if you wanted to use it, of doing SQL called prepared SQL statements. And again, the book has a slightly different version of prepared SQL statements than I do. I'll warn you, my quiz for today uses my version. Okay, this is also taken from the PHP manual. Okay, so the book I'm sure is correct, but my way I know is correct. And a prepared statement is essentially it's a little like a function, okay? So you have a query string, but then you have these parameters which are denoted by question marks. And the question marks are your parameters that will be filled in each time you want the query executed. So you essentially call the prepare statement in order to send the string to the MySQL database, and it will compile this query for you. Okay, so it does whatever compilation, and that way the compilation is done once rather than multiple times every time you send the string. So it's also can be more efficient because the results of the compilation are available. If you're doing this query like multiple times like I do with Code Assessor, these can save a lot of overhead if you use them. So it's not just security. So I guess there's two reasons you use them. One is security to prevent injection attacks, but the second reason is efficiency. Okay, avoids multiple compilations. So there's two reasons that you're going to be using these. Okay, so Then when you want to actually execute the query, you need to bind the, actually it's more than bind, it's this whole thing. You need to bind parameters to the different things, and it's in the same order that the question marks appeared physically in the query. And the second argument is like printf. It tells the query optimizer the type of the parameter. So in this case, we're saying it's a string and it's city. If you have multiple question marks, then you might have SIC if it was a string, then an integer, then a char. And then you'd have, just like printf, you'd have the list of parameters after that. And I think I have the list, there it is. Basically, it's, no character, sorry. String, integer, double, or blob. Normally you'd use string, integer, or double. Okay. So once you've bound it, then you're ready to execute the statement. So the bind doesn't actually execute it. You actually call execute to execute the query, and again, that's sent to the server. It executes it, and now you want to get the results. Okay, and one way to do it, so remember that fetch array was done with the non-prepared statements. Fetch is the way you get one row at a time for a prepared statement. Before you do that, you generally bind variables to whatever results you're getting. So I think the book may have used the form that gets you an array back, and I'm using the form where you bind specific variables to each column name. So you would provide, in this case there was one column, so one variable. In general, however many columns you select, you'd have this many variables in your bind statement. So then fetch is going to return one row and store the values into those variables, and now you can use them any way you like. So, and then when you are finally done with using that particular query, you can call close, and that tells the SQL backend optimizer that it can throw away this particular query. So up here, see $ statement, you got back this kind of object that represents that compiled statement. So here is basically where you release it. And it's a good idea to do it when you no longer need to use the query. So questions about any of PHP's SQL stuff? I think it's pretty nice, pretty simple. Yes? So it tends to be, it could be binary stuff like an image. It usually, I guess, I think of it as a binary piece of stuff. And it can be anything that you want. I suspect that when you say, though, that it is a blob, it's essentially just going to take whatever you present and it's going to just look at it as zeros and ones. It's not going to try to interpret it, those zeros and ones, as a number or a string. Okay, so I think blob might as well just be called binary for all intents and purposes. And I'll admit I've never used blobs. I've heard that they tend to be used with databases that involve images. Okay, because JPEGs, MP4s, all that stuff is encoded essentially as binary stuff. Other questions? Okay, so let's move to regular expressions. I just have a question. So I know you covered regular expressions in what, 3.11? Is that correct, or 3.12? When? 3.12, okay. But the question is, how many of you have previously used regular expressions in a scripting language? Okay, kind of, a little bit. Okay, well, I love regular expressions because they provide such a clean way to extract information from a file or to type check information. I think in a program, you're often, in C++, you often are told that data is presented in a certain way, but C++ has really primitive string handling operations. It's not easy to manipulate strings in C++. And in scripting languages, essentially starting with Perl, they said, look, manipulating strings is really important, and we want to provide a powerful way for you to manipulate strings. And what they came up with as a way of doing it was regular expressions. Of course, they've been around for ages, but someone hit on that as this is the way to go. And for the most part, there was two competing standards, the Perl version and the POSIX standard. And it seems like the Perl version has kind of won out. Like PHP used to support both POSIX and the Perl forms of regular expressions, and they've deprecated the POSIX form. So the basic idea with a regular expression in PHP is that it is a pattern. So you're saying, I want, whoops, not quotes, you want the string to match some pattern. And you're given a lot of pretty powerful ways to express that pattern. And generally the pattern goes through delimiters. In Perl, those delimiters tend to be these forward slashes, but in fact the delimiter can be any non-alphanumeric how was it? I wrote it down because it non-backslash non-white space. So the pattern can be any enclosed between any character which is non-alphanumeric, non-backslash, non-white space. In Perl, it's generally forward slashes, but you could use the @ sign, you could use hashtags, anything your heart desires, not anything that's non-alphanumeric. So you put that in between the two slashes. And the most primitive form of a pattern is simply a word, like you might be searching for Brad. So that's very simple. It would return any instances or tell you whether an instance of Brad was in the string. But where it gets much more powerful is when you start to specify more complicated patterns. Like let's say I wanted the user to enter a social security number. Okay? And maybe we want to allow the user to either enter it as 9 digits, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or the more common way, which is as a 3-2 combination like that. Okay, this could be fairly difficult to check in C++. You have to check that it's 9 characters, you have to check that it's 9 digits, or that it's 11 digits with the dashes in the right place. But in PHP, it's very simple. You could simply say something like \D9, which I know the book didn't say, or \D2, 3, \D2, \D4. And that specifies a social security number very succinctly. Okay, or a similar way of saying it, \D3, a optional slash \D2, optional dash D4. This would also work. So there's multiple ways to specify the pattern, but it's pretty easy for someone to read that and to write it. Now, just a sec. Oh, okay, I'll actually let you go.
Do you need a question mark after the second dash?
Mm-hmm.
And do you need the backslash before the second dash?
Just a sec. No, I was thinking that that backslash was a question mark. Shows how well I am.
Is there anything stopping someone from having the wrong format because they put the hyphen in one of them and not they put the dash in one and not the other spot? Because the question marks would allow for those to not match, right?
So wait, run that by me again.
So I could put 1, 2, 3 dash 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Ooh, you're right. You could actually, this also, you're right. This accepts very good. Yes. Which isn't a bad thing, actually. I mean, it's a valid social security number. Essentially, it's just 9 digits. But yes, very good. That actually, but you're right in saying that these two patterns are not quite identical. Okay, the second one actually accepts a few more strings than the first one. And there is a way that we will get to actually capture this. So there is a way to capture whether they used a dash here, and then specify over here that if you captured the dash here, the dash must be used here. If you didn't use a dash here, then you shouldn't be using a dash here. We'll get to that. Okay, so the book did a very nice job of going over the basic regular expression patterns. Okay, so the big things, I guess, with regular expressions is that a regular expression can be a pattern, can be any character, okay, and that includes digits. You can use dot, which means matches any character except the new line. So it will stop at a new line. Then you have the ability to, the pipe is alternatives. So alternate separates or provides alternate patterns. And then numeric repetition. So the book had the question mark, which represents 0 or 1. So it means optional. Plus, star is 0 or more. Plus is 1 or more. And what the book did not have, but which I'm using, is n comma m, which means n to m repetitions. And if you leave off the m, it means n or more. So that curly braces is really handy. I use it a lot, just like I used it back here. Okay, so that is so if I had, no, there was no comma. If it was 9 comma, then it was accept 9 or more. But without the comma, then it says it must specifically be that many. So actually, thank you. The other way is, there is another way, which is n, which is exactly n repetitions. Okay, and the book did not have the curly braces. So, which is ironic because I find that to be really handy. Okay, so once you have that, you pretty much have, but that by itself is really powerful. Okay, Now, there's a few things that the book did not mention that I do want to mention. Actually, there are some. So there are what are called anchors. So you can, the caret says must match from the start of the string. And $sign says it must match from the end. There's others like \b, actually at end. There's others, but these are the big two, because when you're type checking form data, you basically should always be using the caret and the $sign. So back here, this is actually vulnerable to attack by a hacker because they could embed this legitimate social security number inside of some extraneous stuff. So you really want a caret here and a $sign there to indicate that the string must contain only a social security number. Leave off either one. If I leave off the caret, it would be okay for the social security number to end the string, and for anything if there was stuff before the social security number, the string would still be accepted. The same thing with leaving off the $sign but leaving in the caret. It would say a social security number must start the string, but there could be extraneous stuff after it. So the big thing with these patterns is all that's required for the regular expression to return true is that the pattern match a substring. Okay, so an important thing is the pattern, in general, the pattern does not have to match the entire string. Okay, only a substring. Okay, so use caret and $sign to force the pattern to match the whole string. Okay, I saw a question, hand up. Yes, Bentley.
Two questions.
Mm-hmm.
First off, what happens if you put the caret or the dollar, like $sign not at the beginning of the name? Is that valid?
It is, but it no longer has special meaning. Meaning,
Okay.
it doesn't, it means that it just matches a caret at that point. Unless it appears inside, I forgot to say, you can specify character codes, like if you want to have the vowels. And if you put a caret sign at the beginning, this one specifies consonants because it's everything but. So I forgot to mention character codes, which go inside the square brackets. You said you had a second question.
Yeah, this may be outside of the scope of the class, but how would, you talk about like a hacker being able to mess you up if you didn't have the caret and the $sign? How would someone go about doing that?
So you might be wanting just the social security number, and they might put something after the social security number, and depending on, let's say you now try to insert that string into the database and they're doing an SQL injection attack with it. So let's say the query was supposed to be on a social security number, and now you add that social security number or 1. Now you get everyone in the database rather than just the person. So I guess the biggest thing is they'd be doing an SQL injection attack.
So they can inject their own SQL query.
Or modify your query in some way that you don't want it modified. So that would be the biggest way. Okay, so patterns, anchors, Okay. Square brackets give you all characters, matches any character in that list. It's not dot, dot, dot. It might be, for example, as I said, A, E, I, O, U. Then, because certain things are handy, you get character classes, the most common being \d, \s, \w. \d is all digits. \s is white space. And white space is spaces, tabs, form feeds, return characters, and new line characters. So it matches any of those. And now the big one. \w matches alphanumeric. It seems always that some students think it matches only alphabetic characters. That is not true. It matches A through Z, capital A through Z, 0 through 9, and an underscore. Does anyone know what exactly that set corresponds to, other than it being called alphanumeric? It's not, no, you have more printable characters than that. Happens to be the set of characters that are allowed for C++ and C names. Because when I grew up, alphanumeric just meant letters and numbers. There was no underscore. But don't make that mistake, because I see it a lot. If there is no character code for an alphabetic character, if you want alphabetic characters, the way you do it is you say it like that, which says all characters between lowercase a and z and all uppercase characters from A to Z. So please don't use \w when you think all you want to accept is alphabetic characters. It's misleading.
So GS and W is sort of like shorthands
For those characters, yep, D is shorthand for, W is shorthand for that, D is shorthand for 0 through 9, and \s is shorthand for new line, R, T, F, and a space. Pardon? Form feed. And R is return. So for those of you who've never used a typewriter, typewriter actually has two things. On a typewriter, when you hit the handle, that's a form feed because it advances the line by 1. But until you shove it back, that's a return. So on the old printers, there was a difference between a form feed where it just advanced it a line and return that actually brought it all the way back. So MS-DOS being grounded in the 80s, you still often see \f\r for new line, whereas \n means do both. It means \n equals \f plus \r. Okay, so \n is a Unix thing. \r and \f are MS-DOS abominations. Oh, am I showing my prejudice here about that? No worse than Dr. Planck. Okay. So those character codes are very useful. There's also \D, which means anything but a digit, \S, which means anything but white space, and \W, which means anything but alphanumeric. And I've used those character codes never. So I'm sure that there's good uses for them, but I've never used any of them. Okay. Now, some other things that the book did not have that are helpful. Here's a nice gotcha. So let's say that, okay, before I do that, I have to say one thing. So Perl has 4 commands that deal with regular expressions. Preg match, preg match all, preg split, which you've already seen, preg replace. It is good if you know all 4 of these commands. So preg match takes a regular expression in either single or double quotes, a string, and an array. And it returns in the array any matches that the result of the first match found in the pattern. So for example, if you had a string that was 483261891 and 221889999, the result of that match would be 483, or -26-1891 if the pattern was a social security number. Preg match all has the same parameters. The only difference is that now it will give you all matches. So now that array would also contain 221-88-9999. Preg split takes a pattern, which is effectively a delimiter, and a string, and it breaks the string. Whoops, sorry. So splits the string using pattern as the delimiter. So have any of you used Dr. Planck's fields library? Preg split implements his field library in 1 line of code. Returns an array, and not only that, his splits using blank spaces. Here you can specify any delimiter you want. If you have comma-separated data, which is kind of common from spreadsheets, you can specify the delimiter as a comma. Okay, or the separator for, what's the delimiter for form data going in a URL back to the back end? If the browser sends data, what's form data using get? What is the delimiter? It's an ampersand. So if you can separate, you could specify the pattern as an ampersand. Preg replace takes a pattern. This is great. A replacement pattern and a string, and it replaces all instances of the pattern with the replacement pattern. The replacement pattern doesn't have delimiters for some odd reason. So while the pattern to be matched has the normal Perl slashes, the replacement pattern doesn't. If you were to put slashes in there, it literally would put slashes into your output, which is kind of crazy.
I think that makes sense because that has to be just a string. Like you can't have \b, but you have to specify what characters. It has to be just a string. You can't have like special regex characters.
No, the replacement pattern can. Oh, I see what you're saying. Ah, you're right. That's a good point. Excellent point. The point is that the replacement pattern can't have things like the star or the numeric quantification in it. That in fact, it's taking groups that were matched in the pattern often and doing something. So as an example, let's look at my notes quickly. Okay, so let's say here we have something that is coming in, and it's coming in the form So the \b is saying that it has to start, this has to start a word. This is saying my date is either 1 to 2. This is saying date is 1 to 2. And this is saying that the year is 2 digits followed by 2 more digits. And the parentheses says that we want to capture the content between the parentheses. So whatever that subpattern matches will be stored. And in the replace command, the $1, $2, and $3 refers to the strings that are captured by this is $1. This second grouping with the parentheses is $2. The third capture is $3.
It's not zero index.
Correct. So, well, $0, it is. Okay, so the entire match pattern. So in this case, the entire match pattern would be 2, 3, 1964. So $0 would contain 2, 3, 1964. $1 is equal to 2. $2 is equal to 3. $3 is equal to 64. Okay, so then normally the replacement pattern is doing something with the captures that you had here. So here I was replacing the 4 digits with 2 digits. So the replacement pattern was $1, $2, $3, and the result that I ended up with was 2364. Okay, so replacement is kind of handy when you want to go through a file and replace a whole bunch of words with something else. Like I did here, I wanted to change my dates. Or the Europeans, I think, like to go day, day, month, month, year, year. So you might want to convert that to month, month, day, day, year, year. That's an example where you might use a reg replace. So it's good to get to know all 4 of those. Okay, so now time for some examples and things that can be gotchas if you're not careful. Okay, so the first one, that's not what I want. That's Perl. Maybe this is it. Okay, so here we go. Here we want to match, we want to extract everything between these boldface tags. So basically, we want to extract all the boldface content from our file. So we write this simple regular expression that says match anything in bold tags, and .* says I want all content between the bold tags. And then you'll see I'm printing out the results. So here's my text. It should print out Brad and Nels, right? Or that's what we want. I won't say it should. That is what we want. And let's see what we get. A bigger window than I want. Okay, come on, there we go. Okay, and wait, that's impossible. Did I save it? There we go. My result is not quite what I expected. So you can, come on, there we go. So you can see the 0th entry in the array said the whole string that matched was this one. And then the part that I cared about is, well, it got too much. It got Brad, but then it continued on and got Nels. So the book didn't mention this little nicety, which is that Perl does what's called greedy matching. It goes for the longest string. I'm sorry, did I say Perl? I meant PHP. Goes for the longest string it can match. And the longest string it can match, that is between a boldface and an ending boldface, is that one. And so that's what it matches. It's called greedy. Goes for the biggest match. But that's often not what we want. So you can put a question mark after one of your numeric quantifiers, and that makes it non-greedy. So now if I rerun this, it gets me what I want, which is Brad and Nels. Now, this question mark, might it be ambiguous? What's the other time question marks get used that you've seen thus far? Means 0 or 1. So here's the rule. If the question mark goes immediately after any numeric quantifier, then it means non-greedy matching. So let's write that out. Okay, so if the question mark goes immediately after a numeric quantifier, i.e. star plus or something in quote curly braces, then it means non-greedy matching. Otherwise, the question mark means 0 or 1. So if instead I had put it here, then it's optional. Big difference. Okay, so you just have to get used to the fact that certain characters have overloaded meanings in regular expressions. So greedy is the default. If you put a question mark, you get non-greedy. Okay, let's try something else. So we'll do non-greedy. Brad is a \n is a professor of \n computer science. Okay, so now I've put some new lines into here. Let's give it another whirl. Oh, let's get rid of what so I don't get error messages. Whoops. What happened? Well, this content did not get matched. Anyone know why it didn't get matched? Why Nels got matched, but this did not get matched? It's a multi-line match, but it's using dot star. Bingo. Dot does not match a new line character. So dot cannot search past a new line. If you want it to search past a new line, at the end of a regular expression, you can put certain modifiers. One of them is S. S means that you can search past the end, that dot also matches the new line character. The book didn't tell you that. You might want to put that down. S allows you, makes dot also match the new line character. So S, okay, makes dot match the new line character. Okay, so if we do it and rerun it, now we get also Brad is a professor of computer science. Okay, another thing. that the book didn't mention. So you can use a caret to say that something must match the beginning of a string. Let's say, though, that this string contains all the lines in the file, and you want to return all strings where a boldface tag starts that line. So for example, I want to return something where this boldface starts the line. I'll actually make this terminate for good. But I do not want, for example, so this one starts a line. This one starts a line. This one does not start a line. This one does not start a line. So if I just put a caret here, the only one that's going to match is the thing at the beginning of the string. So if I say write and I run it, I only match Brad is. But if I have a file with a lot of lines, I can change, instead of using the caret, now if I use M, it says match anything at the beginning of a line. So now if I do this, Brad, what? Let's see, maybe. Not there. I bet that's it. Let's give it that a whirl. I think you're right. Yep. So I still needed the caret at the beginning, but now the M says effectively apply that caret to the beginning of each line. Thank you. So the M effectively says when in conjunction if, so M, if there is a caret at the beginning of the pattern, then M says match at the beginning of any new line, not just the beginning of the string. Okay, and it would be the same thing with a, if there is a $sign at the end of the pattern, then M says match at the end of any new line, not just the end of the string. Okay, again, the book I don't think has M. And M&S. Okay. Couple more things. So let's say that you want to extract any header information in a string. So what you want is to extract, let's say that I had, get rid of all this. Let's say I had H1 some content. Then I had H2 more content. Then I have H3 subcontent. So anything that's in a header I want. So whether it's an H, does anyone know how many headers there are? Types H1, H2, H3? You got it, 6. There's 6 of them. So one thing you could do is write, I want H1, well you could I guess say this, 1 through 6. And you could kind of say, whoops. Okay. So that's kind of going to do what you want, except what if you have this? What do you think is going to get matched? So we start, and it will match anything that's less than H1. So this right here matches this part. It goes for a minimal match, so it's going to go to here. And now it's going to match the H2. So the content you're going to get is this content right here, which is not all of the content inside the H1. Yes?
Is it still a minimal match even though you don't have S at the end of the pattern?
Yes. So the minimal match is caused by the question mark.
Oh,
Okay, the question mark is causing the minimal match. So ideally, and Kelsey, you had the other one. You were talking about the dash, right? So the other example is, what if you really did want to say that a social security number is that if they use a dash here, then they also have to use a dash there. Okay, basically what you want to do is you want to capture this information and later use it in the pattern. In effect, you want to interpolate that information back. And you can do that by capturing things and then reusing. So what I could do is this. I'll put it in parentheses. And now here, instead of saying 1 through 6, I can say \1. And what \1 says is to take whatever was captured in this group and you have to match it. Okay, so if I now have my string, I make my text now H1, Brad, and H2, some more H2 content. Okay, this should match the whole string, which it does, okay, because it goes all, H2 doesn't match because the 2 was not saved. It saved the 1, and then it put the 1 back in there. So let's try that with social security numbers now. So I'm going to comment this out. And we'll change the preg match to be \d. Then we will capture this content. Then we will do \d2. Then we will say \1, \d4, and we'll use $text. So the result should hopefully be the null string.
You need the limiters like the /.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so hopefully I get a null string here. And I did, so it didn't match anything. And now let's put a dash up there, and it matched. Okay, So this is called back referencing. Okay, so this is when you use these backslashes, that's called back referencing. Because you're referencing back, it's called back referencing because you are referencing back to a previously captured group. Now, last night when I was experimenting with this, I used double quotes. And it didn't work. And I wasted 15 minutes wondering what the is going on, because this is clearly correct. Looked at several different manuals. It's clearly correct. Does anyone know why double quotes would change anything? I do now. I hunted it down.
Because PHP reserves it for interpolation.
Yep, because it treats a \1 as an octo integer in double quotes. I have no idea why. But if you put a \1 into double quotes, it thinks it's a octo integer.
That makes sense. We use those all the time.
Are you serious, Gus? Okay. Wait. So I'm easily fooled, and you said that with a straight face. So I was thinking, okay, maybe I'm missing something here. So basically, you have to use back referencing with single quotes, or it won't work. Okay, so that's pretty important. So use back referencing.
And you use single quotes as backup.
Oh yes, thank you. Use single quotes back referencing because double quotes makes PHP think that the back reference is an octo number.
Alternatively, you can just always use octal numbers.
There you go. Making you an operating systems person, presumably. Okay, so that is that, blah, blah. Okay, final thing for today. Final two things. So sometimes you have to use parentheses in situations where you don't want to capture it. You just need to use either or. And so for example, let's say I wanted to write a pattern that is dog or cat scan. Okay, you actually that might, let's see how that is treated. So let's say that we have dog scan, because I always forget. Let's say dog or cat scan, $ text, $ results. Okay, and it matched. That makes sense because it would actually match anything. Let's do this. Now, the question is, will that think it's dog scan or dog? So it actually interpreted this as dog or cat. It didn't work. Dog scan wasn't recognized, right? So essentially, cat scan is all one thing, dog is the other. So if I want both, I have to put them in parentheses like that. Okay, well, so this should now work. I got dog scan. The problem is I captured, notice the capture, I also captured dog, which I didn't really want to do. The only reason I was using those parentheses was for delimiting. So there's a way to tell it, in this case, I don't want to capture, and the way you do that is you put a question mark and a colon, and that says I'm just using the parentheses for grouping purposes. I really don't want to do capture. So now you'll notice the 1 will disappear and I just get dog scan. So it's not something I normally don't care whether it captures or not, but if you explicitly want to make it clear that this isn't meant to be a capture group, so parentheses are called capture groups. If you specifically want to say, I'm using these for delimiting purposes, I don't want it to be a capture group, say question mark, colon. But wait, you can use question mark yet one more way, as if we haven't used it enough ways already. So remember that doing things numerically can mess things up. So sometimes you might like to name your capture groups. So we can also say animal, and this names the capture group. It names it. So we'll see now when we do our PHP. Notice that you can reference into that array using that keyword, animal, which is nice because if you later change the regular expression to have something in front of it so that animal is no longer 1 but is 2 in the index order, everything would still work. So you're allowed to name the groups. And you'll see old code that had a P in front of it. I think that stood for Perl because that's how named groups are in Perl. But since they deprecated POSIX, they also got rid of the capital P. So 4 ways you can use question marks now. You can use a question mark to indicate 0 or 1. You can use a question mark to indicate a non-greedy match. You can use a question mark to indicate that parentheses are non-capture groups, or you can use a question mark to indicate that a capture group is named. It's a lot to remember. Okay, so it really is making use of context to determine whether a question mark means anything. So does a question mark mean anything in this context? Yep, it just means you can match an ampersand, a question mark, a star, or a dash. In this case, the star and the question mark have no meaning. Okay, it's just like the dash here means A to F, so you're not matching the dash. If you want to match the dash, you would have to use a backslash. But now there's no ambiguity. The dash literally will match. So it's all about context in your regular expressions. Okay? So you got to get used to using regular expressions because they are super useful. And obviously, it will take some time to get used to it. There is a quiz today to help you get used to it. So don't forget to take the quiz. Plus, the book had plenty of examples. But you will see a lot of use of regular expressions in scripting languages. All scripting languages support regular expressions because they are so useful for doing string manipulation. And after you start using regular expressions, it feels so painful to go back and teach CS 140 where you don't have that powerful string manipulation. And you have to do things like substring matching, except you can't make it match the way you would with a regular expression. You just get frustrated. So now that you've been, it's like opening Pandora's box. Now that you've seen it, you'll always want to use it, at least once you get comfortable with it. Okay, so as I said, today was the last day for PHP, and starting on Tuesday, we head on to the last